Welcome viewers, you're watching Macattack, and in this video I'm going through my rankings of the Star Wars movies. Of course this is all my opinion, but with that out of the way, let's begin. At number 9 I have episode 8, The Last Jedi. I don't have too much to say about this movie that hasn't already been said, and although I don't outright hate it, it was immensely disappointing, and I'd ultimately rather ignore it. The main plot of the film is very thin, comprising basically of a drawn out ship chase, while Rey is following a begrudging old man, who is supposed to be Luke, around his island. The way this film handled Luke is in direct contradiction to everything he stood for in the original movie, leaving a bad taste in my mouth. And Rey basically had no character, pulling whatever she needed to do in order to do well, out of nowhere at every turn. The villains I found enjoyable, especially Kylo, though the direction they went with all of them, particularly Snoke, was very unfulfilling. The casino subplot was a complete waste of time, as was Holdo, Rose, DJ and Phasma, and ultimately all of these missed opportunities and poorly executed moments leave a film which ultimately leaves my interest for the sequel trilogy at practically zero. I give this Star Wars film a 4 out of 10. At number 8 I have episode 2, Attack of the Clones. On a technical level this is easily the weakest Star Wars movie. Though it isn't insulting and doesn't fly in the face of any established lore, it is poorly made, with an overuse of CGI that hasn't stood the test of time, terribly written dialogue, and boring scenes that just grind the whole movie to a halt. There were moments that were great, but not used to their fullest potential. Seeing the Jedi fight together was great, but tactically speaking it made no sense and there was no real tension. Seeing Anakin lose control was cool, but it got cut off immediately. This film had so much potential, but it did very little with it. Kenobi's plotline was interesting, but it was cut up by cringy love story and dull political ramblings that take a lot of the fun out of the film. The villains were also weak, with Dooku coming out of nowhere after they waited Maul in the last film, and he didn't really do anything. This culminated in a final duel which ultimately failed to live up to the excitement of the last instalment, and though this movie does move the overarching plot along, it does so in a very bland way. I give Attack of the Clones a 5 out of 10. At number 7 I have episode 7, The Force Awakens. This film is very well made from a production standpoint, with great visuals, editing and acting. But for a continuation of the Star Wars story, it feels more like a reset button back to how things were in the original trilogy, as opposed to a natural progression of the overarching narrative. Ultimately, it didn't have much rewatchability, mostly due to it essentially being an updated but sloppily executed remake of A New Hope. I was very disappointed with the direction they went in with Luke, and the Jedi as a whole, with the creators obviously trying to distance themselves from the prequels, represented almost literally by blowing up the Galactic Republic and its Senate, as opposed to doing what's best for the story. I enjoyed all of the new characters, and the old characters who properly returned, and looked forward to seeing where each of them would go, and although Rey was a Mary Sue in this film, making her uncompelling, it wasn't half as bad as in The Last Jedi, and at this point I still held hope that they could explain her powers. There were some moments that fell flat, and some moments that were just plain terrible in conception, such as everything they did with Starkiller Base, and ultimately I felt that this film started strong and slowly went downhill from there, resulting in a weak third act and an overall mediocre Star Wars film. I give this Star Wars film a 6 out of 10. At number 6, episode 1, The Phantom Menace. The film that rebooted the Star Wars franchise. I actually don't think The Phantom Menace did a bad job. Yes, it had its flaws. And yes, it was still a little too computer generated, but these things paled when compared to the second instalment of the prequels. The lightsaber fighting was fantastic, and all things considered quite revolutionary. It had a memorable villain which people loved to hate, and great story points, overall good acting and cast, and quite a compelling storyline. It does have many issues. Yes, Anakin should have been a few years older. Yes, Jar Jar was a big mistake. Yes, Maul shouldn't have been killed off. And yes, it did still have the incredibly boring political midsection. But overall the film was pretty good in my opinion. It established the era well, with great world building, and really showed off how the galaxy is faring at this point in time. I give this Star Wars film a 6 out of 10. At number 5, episode 6, Return of the Jedi. In my opinion, though the weakest of the original trilogy, Return of the Jedi certainly isn't a weak film. I personally find the whole beginning on Tatooine to be a bit of a drag, and like many, I do struggle to see how the Imperial forces were beaten on Endor. It had a lot of great reveals and some really strong action sequences, and it did a great job displaying how Luke's power had grown and demonstrating the awe-inspiring evil of the Emperor. The lightsaber choreography was a bit sloppy in places, but I still see it as the strongest of the original trilogy, and the space battle was epic in every aspect. It did a really great job resolving the balance between the light and dark sides of the Force, and had some really emotional scenes on board the Death Star, which in my opinion are some of the strongest of the entire saga. It challenges opinions on family, friends, good and evil, and all things considered was a strong film despite dragging its heels in places. I give this Star Wars film an 8 out of 10. At number 4, Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. For me, this is easily the best of the new Star Wars movies, and up there in quality with some of the originals. Though lacking with the development of its characters and suffering from a clunky first act, the third act of this movie more than makes up for this. The visual aesthetic, world building and character decisions make it feel gritty and realistic, and the combat is beautifully done. The film does a good job of balancing parts from previous Star Wars films with unique ideas in both the characters and storyline, making it feel nostalgic yet surprisingly refreshing and intriguing at the same time. It has some really great moments of emotion and levity, and it tied in very nicely with the films either side of it, making it a satisfying entry for long-term Star Wars fans. I give this film an 8 out of 10. At number 3, Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. By far the strongest of the prequels, as you can see by this list, I hold Revenge of the Sith in the same league as the original trilogy films. First and foremost, it was an action movie, and here it excelled. The visuals were a huge improvement on the first two installments, making it the best looking of the saga when it came out. The acting was back up to par in my opinion, and though the dialogue was questionable in places, it wasn't half as bad as the films leading up to it. It did a great job rounding off the gap between episode 2 and 4, tying up a lot of loose ends, though perhaps a little too neatly in places. The lightsaber choreography was spot on in almost every fight, and I found the Mustafar duel both intense and emotional. It does have its flaws, such as Grievous and Dooku being blatantly sidetracked for the main villain of the story, Vader. Also, Vader's turn was too quick, purely looking at how it was portrayed through the films. Ultimately though, it's probably the most exciting of all the Star Wars films, and is also probably the one I've watched the most times, mainly due to its immense third act. I give this film an 8 out of 10. At number 2, Episode 4, A New Hope. This is the film that started it all, but it's not just because of nostalgia that this film is rated second. Everything from the soundtrack to character developments, from comedy to action, this film did perfectly. It revolutionised cinema, and on a tiny budget, it arguably had better effects than Attack of the Clones. The acting is fantastic, the world development amazing, and the threat level of the Empire leaves them as a truly compelling villain. Topped off, of course, by Vader himself. I always loved the fatherly figure of old Ben, and his death was very suiting to demonstrate to Luke that there is more to life than the physical. It has some iconic moments such as Ben's voice in Luke's cockpit, and the beautiful music as Luke looks out over the twin suns of Tatooine. All of the characters are lovable and compelling, and it is very close to a perfect film in my opinion. My only critique would be the slow pacing at times, though in the places where it picks up, it keeps you on the edge of your seat. I give this film a 9 out of 10. And at number 1, Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. I follow the common consensus when it comes to my number 1 pick. There is a reason why the majority of people rank this one as the best. More than anything, the characters and their often conflicting personalities are so engaging. The way the Force is presented in this film is also perfect. Its mysticism, its power and its light and dark are very interesting aspects. This film introduces the leaders of the two sides of the Force and demonstrated the conflicts of their apprentices. The Vader-Luke fight is my favourite sequence of the entire Star Wars saga, and it also led to one of the greatest reveals in cinema history. Cloud City was awesome, and the film challenged, even more so than Episode 6, opinions of friends, family, light and dark. It is both the most emotional and engaging of the Star Wars saga. Its increased budget is evident, with some noteworthy visuals. It didn't lack large-scale action though, such as the space battles with the Millennium Falcon, and the truly epic Battle of Hoth. Not only is this my favourite Star Wars film, but possibly my favourite film of all time. I give this film a 10 out of 10. And so there is my list and reasoning behind it. Please leave your list in the comments and feel free to discuss the points made. Do you agree with me? If not, why not? Keep your comments PG and may the Force be with you.